Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.
God, I'm so confused right now. I don't understand what's going on. Jesus. My baby is gone. They took my baby. I'm so angry right now. My heart hurts because they took my only child. Oh God. I need answers, please. Please, God. I need answers. That's all I need. Okay.
Mom, can you hear me?
Baby, I hear you.
Why are you down there crying? You need to understand that I needed to go. Look what happened. We now are fighting a war that needed to be fought for our freedom and our rights that we deserve to have. I know you're sad that I'm gone. Your only son. But I'm with Dad now. And we're watching you, amongst others, be strong for us as a people. Come on, Mom. It's fine. I'm here watching over you, and I'm here with you every step of the way. But understand that we need to fight and fight hard and continue to fight. Look, we have Martin Luther King now, Rosa Parks, and all these other revolutionary fighters to make sure that you don't have to go through what, to make sure that another mother doesn't have to go through what you went through.
But baby, it hurts so bad.
Sometimes you have to suffer through pain to get through the future, and a great future. You may be in pain now, but one day you will realize that it was all worth it. I was the sacrifice. Now, let the movement begin so we can move forward. Mom, I'll never be gone from you. I'm here with you. I will never ever leave. But you have to continue to be strong, not only for me, but for our future little boys and little girls.
And
Gotta go now. You stay strong, Mama, and I love you, and I will always love you. And keep my memory alive.
I love you too, baby. I love you too.
Good evening. Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time. You know that this show is a little different tonight because we opened with some very powerful statements. So let me introduce the panel that's here tonight. And that is seated opposite me is Emmett Till.
How you doing?
For those of you that know anything about the civil rights movement, you know that Emmett Till is considered the spark. His death, his murder, is considered the spark of the civil rights movement. Seated next to Emmett is his mother. Welcome. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Seated next to Mrs. Till is Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl is a regular guest on this show. Theodor Herzl is considered the father of Zionism. And you will understand as we proceed why it's important for him to be here. Seated next to Theodor Herzl is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Just everyone's, I mean, there's no one that can say that he was not a president that was capable of bringing this country together, because that he did. Among his other accomplishments, after the event at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, that was a day that this country needed to come together, and President Roosevelt stepped into the breach and brought us together. To my left is my co-host, our co-host, Babette Josephs, former state representative Babette Josephs. Welcome, Babette.
Thank you, thank you.
We're all a little somber because of the footage that you just watched. So, Babette, I would think that it does seem that the death of Emmett Till sparked the civil rights movement. I mean, we talk about that all the time. And I believe where we are now is that in looking at the death of Emmett Till, the premise of this show is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, this present day version of the Emmett Till murder. Is the public going to come up and protest this? Just as Mrs. Till, when you had that casket open, that shook the world.
Oh, yeah.
So would you want to talk a little bit about how you got there?
It was, I had to look at my child being taken from me and the way that they did my baby. It was like nothing I've ever seen in my life. So I wanted to show the world.
And
what
your
they
bravery, and I mean those pictures which are being put on the screen for the audience to see, those pictures were shocking. It
Oh,
shocked
yeah.
the consciousness of the country.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps the people that killed Mr. Khashoggi saw the Emmett Till thing and knew the type of publicity that it generated
Yes.
and how it sparked the civil rights movement, and maybe that's why they planned to dismember his body and not ever let it be displayed. Maybe they
I
were.
don't think they thought of that at all.
That's
They thought
interesting.
that they were covering up with the act that they did. They didn't want that to become public, I don't
I
think.
think they were hiding.
I think what they did was, especially by sending somebody out impersonating him from the embassy to make people believe that he
Oh,
was still
yeah.
alive.
That he left.
Yeah,
They
that was
weren't-
crazy.
They weren't looking to make any more of a message than to make
They took
their leader
pictures of
happy.
some guy leaving
But
and said, there you
if
left.
That it was him,
if in
right.
fact somehow the body could come back, or it was whole and it came back to the United States, and or even use the tape that they have
And
as
that's-
a symbol of the body, would it arouse more public opinion?
More
To do-
outcry, I see what
And-
he's
right,
saying.
Right, more outcry in
Right.
terms of the relations with Saudi Arabia. I mean, the Senate passed a resolution, about it, and Paul Ryan in his
In the House?
in his way to stop the House from voting on it, and they can't even get it passed by both houses. And to me, the Emmett Till thing was, totally barbaric, as was the Khashoggi thing, totally
Yeah.
barbaric. And I think in one time in the discussion in the green room, even you said that if the tape ever becomes public,
Yes.
it will be all over
Yes.
for the Crown Prince.
correct.
On one of our citizens who happened to be black at a time when people were moving toward a civil rights movement.
Which is why
And
it
this
happened.
just pushed it forward to the point where And by the way, it wasn't automatic because it took another almost 10 years for that Civil Rights Act to be passed, and because of that, it was
We
passed.
don't have,
but I
we
think-
don't have equal rights today.
But I
in
think
this
what
country.
Vivian was saying is, will the assassination of Khashoggi be a stimulus for more stringent United States policy towards those kind of
Towards-
acts, towards Putin? I mean, when Putin walks in and high-fives MSB,
Oh, yeah.
I
That was
mean,
crazy.
you just say what's going
needs-
on in the
I
It
world.
was definitely despicable, but it's been something that's been going on
Well,
time immemorial
But
from,
see,
from,
but
di-
see,
from dictatorships.
I feel like it is important to make sure that my death and other people's deaths is out there, because any murder against man is wrong. Like, no matter what the case may be, any murder is wrong. And the fact that my mother had enough guts to sit there and show my body, I feel like with Khashoggi, they did the complete opposite, because they knew if it was out there about like the outrage and everything. So that's why.
And that's to Mr. Herzl's point, that perhaps because of them knowing about the way that the country responded with the showing of Emmett Till's body, that perhaps them not having the body present. And I understand you, President Roosevelt, you said, no, they just wanted to get away with it. So they sawed up the body because they wanted to get away with it. But this is something that's troubling to me about it. This is an attack on the press. We cannot look at this event as an attack on a other.
Right.
He was
As
a
Dr.
journalist.
He was a
journalist.
journalist. This is an attack against journalism. And that's why I think
and
it's
otherwise,
bigger.
how do we know what's going on if we don't have our
Listen,
first
I agree with you. The
estate?
freedom of the press is very, very important. But if this would have happened by Americans against an American, then I would stand up and say this is a watershed moment for freedom of the press and for violence against journalists and anybody else that's in opposition to the government, which is very important in our country. It's one of the freedoms in the Constitution. But it wasn't. It was a foreign entity against a foreigner, even though he was a resident of the United States. And for whatever reason, and I'm not suggesting that it wasn't important and it may not, move the needle a little bit, but you can't compare it to what we're talking about in the Till situation.
But what you're saying, President Roosevelt, and it may be less than an overwhelming movement for a lot of people, but what you're really saying, and in your own administration, you were a great man, but you're saying that political considerations trump moral considerations. So, for example, that's probably why you didn't back the anti-lynching legislation that was introduced, because you needed politically to make sure that the Southern Democrats or the Dixiecrats, the segregationists, stayed with you with the New Deal legislation.
That's not a parallel.
Well,
I mean,
no,
first
I'm
of
not
all,
saying it's
first of
parallel.
all,
I'm saying
politics always plays a point.
Well, that's what. But
And the politics then was important because there were many. I'm not suggesting that lynching was okay by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew it was a bill that would have very, very, very much difficulty passing. And at the same time, I could get the approval of all of these Southern Democrats for all of the social legislation that I passed that helped everybody. Not just black people, not just Jews, not just white people, everybody. The CCC, Social Security, and all of the other, and the WPA, and on and on and on. All the things that I did. And I had to do that to survive and to get those people done. And at the same time, I was fighting a world war on two fronts, in Europe and in the Pacific.
I don't
so
want to
understand.
equate you with
It doesn't mean that I was any less important in all of those things.
But if you
everything
ask-
had to be put in its
But
place at that
President
time.
Roosevelt, if you asked a Trump supporter or even President 45 now, he would use the same rationale. You hear him say it all the time. I'm getting all the things I accomplished. And so the fact that a little girl dies on the border because nobody takes care of her doesn't matter, because the ends justify the means. And you're saying the
Should have
same
been the
thing.
Yeah, but
President
he's
died.
lying
Yeah,
about
but-
everything. He's not telling it. He doesn't have all those things that we had to deal with back in the 30s. He's lying about that because he wants to scare his base, so that the only way that he can have any kind of relevance whatsoever with those few people that support him is to do that.
Now wait,
So it
I
has
just
nothing
want
to do with
I just want
reality.
to ask. I just want to ask you to hold that because that's the next. In the next block, we are definitely going to be talking
Oh,
about that.
okay.
We're talking about immigration. I want, but what I
Because I was getting ready to say.
and I want you. Listen. I definitely want to hear what you have to say. But I think one of the things that strikes me, and I thought I heard Babette sort of allude to it, is that journalism. We will never know what is going on if there's a free if it's open and it's okay to kill a journalist. I don't care what he is. And the thing that happens with Khashoggi that is so telling and so damning to me is the fact that we know we know that this is what happened, and yet we have someone who occupies the White House who says we do too much business with Saudi Arabia to say anything. And this is not just him saying it. This is an attitude that's beginning to spread. There are many people who believe we need the Saudis. They need us more than we need them. But be that as it may, no one's talking about it. So I want us to look at Jamal Khashoggi and his death as something that means an attack on what we believe, the First Amendment, free press. I mean, that's in the fabric of our country.
He was a journalist.
Well, really,
let me
is
ask
it
Mr.
really
Till
free, though?
something because the free press and Putin kills journalists. But Mr. Till, your death has relevance today in terms of.
Of course. I mean, you see, unarmed
do you
black
feel you
teenage
died in
boys.
vain?
I don't feel like I died in vain, but I feel like the overall mission is not really being paid attention to. I mean, when you have the president of the United States, like how many presidents have we had? We have 45. How many have actually really paid attention to the African Americans and the Negroes and throughout history?
2 or 3.
Yes, but I mean, the problem
Maybe.
is we have not. I mean, we've came a long way, but we still have a long ways to go. And it's like it's a generational thing, you know. And I feel like
It's more than that, I think. It might be more than one generation.
like every generation that passes, if there's nothing done by it, we're not going to get nowhere in the future. And I feel like there's sometimes, no disrespect, Mr. President, that some presidents they just put the black issue to like the 5th or 6th issue on their long list of issues, you know,
It's
on their
everybody's
agenda.
Right.
issue.
Yeah.
It's everybody's issue. And if it's not everybody's issue, we end up where we are now, which
Right.
is in a racist society.
Listen, you can't compare this president to any president. Or you can only compare him to the despots around the world. I mean, he has been anti-press from the moment he took office, calling the press the enemy of the people. I mean,
Fake news.
you talk
Yes,
about
fake news.
something
Was
that's
my death
treasonous
fake news?
and in violation
Right.
of the basic precepts of our Constitution. I mean, that's it. And this is just another step
There's a
in that
reason
process
why
by
it's the First
ignoring this.
Amendment. There's a reason why
Of
it's the
course.
First Amendment.
And by ignoring this, just fits right in with everything he said up to this point in time. Now, another thing that we have to consider is, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be, but I heard this somewhere, that over 250 journalists were killed last year around the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
It's an alarming number.
but some of the things that you see right now, even with this administration, they're about to pass today or tomorrow the Criminal Justice Reform Act, which is a very, very, it's more of a, I mean, it's not going to have that big an effect because only 10% of the prison population are in federal prisons.
Right.
But it will have affected a message. And what's happening on a local level, and we can see it right here in Philadelphia, where Krasner was elected the district attorney, and he's very, very
Good point, good point.
Yeah, he's moving in that direction
Yes.
against all of the authoritarian police
Right.
and all of those issues.
Right.
Really
So and
believe-
it's not just in Philadelphia, but these district attorneys have been elected in a lot of places around the country. So that's what has to happen. People have to be elected who ascribe to those things, who want to move the racial issue forward, who want to do something against anti-Semitism.
But y'all
And
tell
that's
us
when
but y'all
it's
tell
gonna
us
work.
one thing on the news, but we don't see any change. I mean, how can a black person feel comfortable voting for somebody sitting there telling you, yes, we are going to sit there and change things. I am against lynching. I'm against racism. But then when we elect the official, nothing is
Then they
done.
change, right.
I
You
mean,
have-
right,
you
right.
and then on top of that,
You
we
have a
had a black
you have a
president.
senator
Not
who
everybody.
was just elected in Mississippi that said she wanted a front row seat at a lynching.
Yes.
Right.
Right, you wanted
Right.
a front
That's
row.
what I'm saying.
In
We're
fact,
still electing
I
these
think
people.
one of her relatives
Right.
was
Wait a
involved
minute.
in your death.
That's why you
one
have to
of her-
vote.
One of her relatives, Hyde Smith. What is her first name?
Cindy.
Cindy
Cindy.
Hyde
Cindy.
Smith she is married. No, she made a remark about the governor of Mississippi. It is the governor of Mississippi
Right.
whose uncle
Murdered
murdered you.
Yeah.
So-
And Cindy Hyde Smith he appointed her as the senator. And she is, these are buddies. So when she makes the statement about a lynching and a front row seat for the lynching, do you realize how personal it is to
Exactly.
you?
And we're electing these people. That's
Right.
my thing.
That's the point.
See,
I
when I
agree with
speak on progress, that's not progress.
But a lot of
And
black
I think
people
we're
feel
gonna
that
deal with-
verse.
I think we're going to deal with it later, but it also ties in with voter suppression.
And we're going to be
Listen,
doing
But-
it's
that.
never
but
going
we
to
have
happen
to see
all at once,
change.
all over.
Okay.
But it has to happen
Somewhere.
little by little, and that's what I was bringing up with Krasner in Philadelphia and other forward-thinking people that have been elected recently, that it's going to happen. It'll happen in certain places
I
first,
hope so.
and hopefully it'll spread.
From
Okay.
your
And
lips to God's ear.
as the dynamic of our population changes, as the population changes from white to tan to brown,
Okay.
and the brown and tan people are going to be in the majority,
Right.
then all of those people, and I don't mean to say you, but saying you,
No,
but
no.
all of those people will have the opportunity, if they vote, if they can vote and vote as a block for their own interest, like a lot of people vote against their own interest, but
Right.
if you vote for your own interest, then you'll see change.
But why
But
vote
before
if it's
that,
not
it's
gonna
going to
make a
come in
difference?
very, very
But
But
wait a
what I'm
minute.
saying is
That's the problem.
That's the
That's the
thing.
problem. Now you
And
just
let's just take a
Show that
illuminated.
it makes a difference.
You just illuminated
We just
something
have
that
to
we are
show.
going to talk. We're going to be talking about later
Okay.
because
I have a
it is
big-
important.
Right.
And what do we say about this show? We use our platform to explain to people the background of historical events and how cyclical it is and how it applies to what is going on today.
And what people need to do to think about, to respond to it, and to understand that it is part of a cycle and that we don't have to be caught in it.
We
don't have to do this.
see, the interesting thing
We
is,
don't.
when I hear today, I hear young people say, well, you know, if I had lived in the 1950s, well, they couldn't have done that to me. I wouldn't have taken it.
Right.
And we talked about this, President Roosevelt, you and I talked about this in the green room. Mr. Herzl, we talked about the fact that if you lived in 1950 and that was what was being
norm.
done,
What
you did.
that's what you did.
Right.
The difference is these watershed moments that say all of a sudden we don't have to do that anymore. That's how I became involved in the civil rights movement. That's how a lot of people. That's how Babette
we
became a
all did.
politician. It's kind of like
Okay.
I know this is the way it is, but
Right.
You know, we talked about
Yes.
in the 50s how in the South, if you were black, you sat in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
You
Well,
were
that's why
Jewish.
Rosa
Right.
Parks, what she did, was so important. And what they did in the luncheonette when they sat down in the white people's area was so important because it brought change. It showed that it can be done. And then people lined up behind those ideas and precipitated
it's-
change.
But I
sure,
wanna
it
tell
hasn't
you,
happened that quickly.
Your
but it will.
death, Rosa Parks said that when she refused to move and go to the back of the bus, she was thinking about
She was thinking
your
about
death.
Emmett Till.
She was thinking about Emmett Till. So that these
didn't know that.
horrible things happen. These horrible things happen. And we look at them and say, well, what is it that's going to make something happen? Make something different. But I am so personally affronted by the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi because he was a journalist. And just the idea that, as Babette said earlier, we don't know anything other than the information that we get from journalists.
Otherwise,
right.
They're putting their lives on the line
Oh, yeah.
to tell us and let us know what is going on. And what do we say here at this show? We're not trying to tell you how to think. We just want to make sure you are thinking.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when we look out at the world and see how people are not thinking. I don't know if from your approach,
People
Mr.
get
Herzl,
scared.
did you see when Vladimir Putin and MBS greeted each other? Did you see that high five?
It made me sick, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
anti-Semitism, and I would guess, I don't know what the statistics are on racism, but anti-Semitism last year in
Yes,
your
those
country, the United
incidents.
States, the incidence of anti-Semitism incidents was up 60%.
Yes.
Recently,
And
you
we're
had
gonna see it going up more, I fear.
a
Right.
shooting in a synagogue.
Sure, it's the worst
And
anti-Semitic
the worst
attack.
anti-Semitic thing in the United. My
In history.
attitude is
The history of this country.
right.
Yeah.
And
My
in the place of
attitude is
worship.
there's always going to be racism.
That's
There's
where
always,
you
so you
find
got to
people.
keep it at its minimum. And the people who are prejudiced against have to really band together and use their political
Of
rights
course,
to make
it
sure.
wouldn't be a bad idea if we didn't allow everybody in the world to have a gun.
Well, that's another issue.
That's another show. Two shows.
But
We'll go for that.
because one of the things that the powerful throughout history have done is take away the rights from the other.
Yes.
So
Okay.
if you look what
I
happened
want to
in
take gun rights away from them all.
right, but if you look what happened in some of these elections in terms of
The
voter
recent
suppression
elections in
and
November?
keeping right. So they know that. So the least powerful have the least power to correct that, and so it's a constant fight. And that, to me, that's going to be the fight. If what President Roosevelt said about people have to vote and vote their interest to change things, as long as we can fight to protect people in the country and throughout the world, fight to protect the right to vote so you can vote and your voice can be heard, things might get better, but I don't
But
see
we also
that
have to
happening.
help people.
You know, you
We
have to
have
put
to
everything
get
in
people out. We
perspective,
have to
too.
remind
But wait a
them.
minute.
But you have to let them be
It's
able.
not so easy for
That's-
those of us who are middle class and used to voting. It's easy for us, but it's not so easy.
That isn't.
People,
But I
are
can-
afraid. People don't know what to do when
Right,
they
right.
get there. They don't know if they qualify. They know they were born in this country, but am I really a voter? Am I the right age? Am I, you know?
Well, how
and
about the woman
nobody
that just
really
went to
does
jail?
any education.
Right.
Listen, the government can tap your phone, find out who you talk to, find out if you were watching porn, if you were doing this, and they can't legitimately count elections and make they're still having a problem in North Carolina in a
That's a very
congressional
good point.
district
Yes.
Yeah.
on an
The ninth
election,
congressional
and we
district
have
in
all
North
this
Carolina.
technology. So the conclusion I draw is they don't want to make it better.
22, we're going to say good night, and this concludes this episode of Conversations Across Time. And next week, we are going to be talking to you. We're actually doing it in our third block. So you sit tight, Mr. Till. We have some conversation across time for you. So this has been Conversations Across Time. Please join us next week for a discussion, and we will be talking at that time about immigration. It's a very important topic, and I want to get the view of my guests, and I believe they're going to have some interesting things to say about it. Thank you very much. Good night.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.